The earliest representation of Indian landscapes were made by British artists who arrived in India in the middle of the 18th century. These were professional artists, but somehow they could not make their careers in England, and having heard of the exotic land of India, they took the permission from the East India Company and arrived here. As they traveled across the country, they were fascinated by the tropical landscape with its mountains and rivers, as well as by its flora, fauna, and the diverse ethnicity. Some of these important British artists who painted landscapes, Indian landscapes, were Thomas and William Daniel, the uncle and nephew duo, Tilly Chineri, William Hodges. These were some of the important artists among many others who came here and created landscapes. Uh, Looking at the works of Thomas and William Daniel, they came to India in 1884, and with the help of the East India Company, they were given enough aid so that it made it comfortable for them to travel around the country. They came as far as South and also made many paintings here. One of the paintings that they painted, especially Thomas Daniel, was that of the ruins at Sasaram. Looking at the painting, if the title is not there, it looks very much like any of the English paintings. This is because they bring in the qualities or the characteristics of the picturesque and the sublime, essential elements of the Romantic movement that was developing in England at this time. What is most important here is that they also bring in the element of light, which is quite tropical, as one would witness in India. Hence, Thomas Daniel's painting is realistic and captures the essential idea and the ambience of the Indian countryside. His nephew William Daniel painted the banks of the Ganges, in which he has given a lot of details, the boats, the activities, particularly the banyan tree with its knotted energetic roots that can be seen and which has been rendered very realistically. He captures those essential movements of life and activities, which gives or rather lends power to his paintings. These were landscapes that were painted by the Daniels. William Hodges, on the other hand, had arrived earlier in India and he had also traveled across, but his landscape somehow lacks the essential quality of light, which one would associate it more with the works of the Daniels. And he has painted a fortress at Chunar, which at a glance appears more like a universal landscape, a landscape that one can see it either in Europe or in Africa or even in India. So that particular essentiality which would mark it as Indian is obviously lacking in the works of Hodges. Coming to the modern Indian scene, the first of the Indian artists who establishes modernity through the technique of oil painting as well as the Indian subject matter was of course Raja Ravi Verma. Ravi Verma has used landscape, not created pure landscape for its own sake, but he has provided an imaginary landscape in many of his paintings, especially Shakuntala, looking back to get a glimpse of Dushyant on the pretext of removing the thorn from her foot, has the qualities of a very thick forest because there is hardly any sky which can be noticed here. It's an imaginary forest as one would imagine with the trees and the shrubs, etc. There's also another work which he has painted, also that of Shakuntala, lying on the grass and lost in the thoughts of Dushyant and surrounded by two of her friends. And incidentally, here there is also the representation of a buck. Uh, Ravi Verma has given again a view of the forest, which is a very generic a view of the forest as such. But what is important here is the insertion of the element of the buck that becomes a metaphor of the lost lover. So in this way, Ravi Verma did make use of the landscape, but not for its own sake, but to provide a background for many of his paintings. Abanindranath Tagore, who was the founder of the Bengal art movement, creating the nationalist style, had developed his own wash technique with a combination of Indian miniature technique along with the Japanese washes. And this technique had resulted in him creating landscapes, particularly, which are very elegant, graceful, charming, lyrical, poetic, and has an air of romance about them, as one sees it in the canal at Shahjatpur or the landscapes of Diogar, and particularly the untitled landscape. The untitled landscape seems to carry the very sentiments and emotions, a sense of a nostalgia in the way the boats are represented, in the way the architecture is represented, and most important is the Abanindranath Tagore's use of line, which is very gentle, free flowing, and with absolute facility of his brush and the hand, he seems to have rendered the very forms and the shapes of the various objects in the landscape. Moving on to Nandalal Bose, who was at one time a student of Abanindranath Tagore, but uh, he did not continue with his master for a simple reason that his mindset was not to create nostalgic literary paintings, but rather he wanted to convey more the environment and the life that was around him. Rabindranath Tagore appointed Nandalal Bose to head the Kala Bhavan at Shantiniketan, a school that he had already founded earlier, but now he developed this for the higher education of the arts. And in Nandalal Bose, Rabindranath Tagore saw not only an artist but also an intellectual with perceptive insights that would bring about a change in the approach to modern Indian art. And that is what exactly Nandalal Bose did. He moved away from painting any of the epics or the folklores or any other stories as it was done with many of the Bengal artists, but rather he got more interested in the environment of Shantiniketan, the Santal tribes that were there, and particularly the forests. He would go into the forest every day and he would contemplate there, he would spend a lot of time there and also make a number of sketches. And it was this concept of going out, meditating with nature, internalizing its forms, and then coming back and from memory drawing what was already seen or remembered was what established the innovation in Nandalal's approach to art education. So we find Nandalal Bose creating landscapes that are almost abstract, or like his fishermen at Gopalpur, where the forms are, of course, distorted and elongated, but there is a sense of action, a movement, a life, and an ambience of the activity at sea, which he has captured in his pen and ink. The next artist who was equally important was Jamini Roy. Now we associate Jamini Roy with his path-breaking innovation in art by engaging with the folk art traditions of Bankura. But before he came on to this, he had started off as a portrait and a landscape artist, and he was very successful. So his landscapes are again those of the city of Calcutta or that of the rural areas that he was familiar with, and these were painted in a typical post-impressionist style with a particular light influenced by that of Van Gogh as well as Gauguin. It was his search, it was his quest for a visual language that led him into investigating the folk art tradition. Another important artist of the 30s and the 40s was Sailus Mukherjee. He used his oil paintings as one would use the watercolors in a very thin brushed coatings as he gave to his works, and using the back of his brush he would also outline the human figures as well as the form. His most well-known iconic painting that we associate with the artist is the Windy Day, where the clothes are drying on the clothesline and the women are going about the daily chores, their saris billowing out in the wind, as can be seen. And he has also captured the essential Indian colors of the rural sites that one would associate with. Or either he would paint them in a very abstract manner. So his landscapes would be dark, gloomy, pessimistic, or they would be bright, airy, graceful, and optimistic. The very quest of painting landscapes around this time also coincided with the nationalist politics, where politics and art converged together. And it was Gandhi's philosophy that the life of India is lived in its villages. And this was one of the prime reasons that we find also an engagement with folk art that was already started with Jamni Roy, and also the representation of the many landscape which came from the villages, painted by many of these artists of the 30s and the 40s. Coming to the south, KCS Panika, having been the student of D.P. Roy Chaudhary, he had absorbed the wash color technique which Roy Chaudhary had himself developed. And these watercolors, as Panika painted, were those from the villages or the rural sites of Kerala. And already in his watercolors, he uses very broad brushstrokes and captures the vitality and life of the villages as one would see it in these areas of Kerala. So his watercolors, while conveying the essence, conveying the vitality, the actions, the activity, the essence, he was able to render it in thin color washes as the huge banyan tree which he painted. N.S. Bendre. N.S. Bendre was an artist, Narayan Sridhar Bendre, who came from Bombay but also taught at the Faculty of Fine Arts in Baroda. And he created landscapes using dot-like technique, which was almost pointillistic, a very laborious, physical intensive process, but he created these and at the same time imparted a lot of depth in terms of light, shade, volume to the trees and nature around, and equally the brilliant colors that one would associate with the Indian landscapes. He also painted a Kerala landscape where there are boats and also the coconut groves. Here the dot seems to have extended into short strokes, but there is a very strong design quality that one notices in Bendre's work. Surya Prakash. Surya Prakash, an artist from the south, from Hyderabad particularly. His landscapes, he came into painting landscapes much later in life, sometimes around 2000, 2004, when he started painting landscapes. Now, his landscapes are not exact outdoor paintings as one would imagine, but he used considerable uh, engagement with photography, and it is the photographs that he used, but it is not one particular photographs that he would use and say, okay, that this is one vantage point in nature that I like, and hence this is what I would paint. As a matter of fact, he would make a collage of all his many photographs, not on the computer screen because he was not too savvy about it, but in his mind. He would put together a series of photographs in front of him and then accordingly choose the elements. So, in this way, he created classic landscapes, again using a technique which was both the dot and the short strokes, and he would paint in layers that would go up as much as 30 to 40 layers. That is why a look at Surya Prakash's landscapes gives a kind of an essential depth, a depth that one would see in nature, as well as captured the tonalities and the various shades associated with nature and in the way nature blossoms or in the way nature decays. Another artist from Bangalore, Milind Nayak. Milind Nayak created landscapes in which he captures the very life and the vitality. He was not so much interested in bringing about a realism, but it was through abstraction, through his various mediums that he used. He captured the very life of nature, of which he had great love for it. And in oil paintings, similarly, he also built it up in many layers, sometimes creating abstractions or sometimes creating designs from nature. Another artist by name Yashwant Shivarkar, he has painted many scenes of the Ganges banks. And the watercolor that he has particularly painted is poignantly evocative in the way it shows the early morning activities along the banks of the Ganges or the Ghats, where in the background, because the rising sun has created a mist, so the background is represented in a very effervescent manner, in a very capricious manner, where there is no clarity at all. And the waters, with the reflection of the sun's rays, has been shown with shallow ripples and then the boats on it. So it's a painting which conveys perhaps nostalgia, emotions, sentiments, and many more things. So these are some of the most important artists that I have mentioned. Of course, there are many more who continue to paint in watercolors. Yes, one artist from Punjab by name Ram Viranjan, who's also a professor, also a researcher, author, and his watercolors uh, are very, very realistic. And all of these artists who have worked in watercolors shows the facility of this particular medium, where they have been able to perfect it, because it's very difficult to touch a watercolor, as any artist would know, in contrast to oils, which allows for many manipulations and many corrections, but watercolor does not allow. So here what becomes very important is the keen insight, the perception, the perfection of the mastery of the technique of watercolors, and importantly capturing the life or the very essence of that particular moment of nature is what makes these artists' work truly different, distinct, and awesomely magnificent. So we have in India's modernity representation of landscapes that has varied according to the concept, according to the philosophy, according to the nationalist ideology as it was demanded. And what one confers from all of this is the brilliant talent, the artistry, and the dexterity which the artist has foregrounded in their works.